Hi, everybody. Welcome to Radical Conversations. I'm Adrienne Jefferson, the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City of New Haven. This series is going to be about having some difficult conversations about anti-racism and how we move forward with racial equity and advancing racial justice. Today with us, we have Shelly from the International Festival of Arts and Ideas, who is the new Executive Director.
Thank you. Hi, Adrienne. Happy to be here.
Happy to be here too with you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah.
You've been doing some good work, Shelly.
Well, thank you. It's important work. It's important work, and we do it together. So it's a blessing to be here.
Yeah, I was really excited when you first came because of your energy, and also though for what you stand for as a person, as an ally, as a white ally, and an arts leader who is advocating for anti-racism. And so I thought that having this conversation with you today would be great for our arts organizations who you know are doing the work. So you know our arts organizations took the pledge to be an anti-racist organization and to start that work.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of questions. And I also think that there's a lot of misinterpretation and a lot of confusion. And so I thought we would just have a raw and real conversation as two women who are in this work.
That sounds great. Let's go.
All right, sounds good. I guess.
Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've realized is that there are a lot of acronyms out in the world, right? So, and they're changing all the time. It seems like they're changing. So one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is BIPOC and engaging that acronym, as well as HWO. Have you seen that show up? Historically White Organization.
I saw that for the first time when you sent that to me. I was like, what is she talking about? I had to look it up.
Yes, and I had to look it up too the first time I saw it. And that can get confusing, but the definitions or the meanings behind those acronyms are important. They're put together for a reason, right? So I'm curious if you can talk to me about why is BIPOC being used? Why is it important? What are the limitations with it? Are there limitations with it? From your perspective, because I know this is an acronym that you both use and see a lot as you're doing anti-racism work, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I use it because it's what's being used now to identify Black, Indigenous people of color. I use it because it's an inclusive word. However, that word was not created by Black people. And I think we have to be aware and cognizant of that. That word actually was created by white people to be able to get their hands around and wrap their head around anti-racism work and who all they are trying to serve and need to reach and need to be more inclusive with. So that's why the term really exists. So I just want to be clear about that. Now, is it a word that all of us are using now? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it can be a word that speaks over people's heads? Yes, absolutely. Which I feel like that with acronyms in general, when we're talking about anti-racism work, I often wonder, and I know I've told you this many times, I often wonder if we are talking over people's heads, especially for the people we are supposed to be serving. And also, would they refer to themselves as that?
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do,
that way. And so I think when we use words, we often box people in. However, I understand the use of the word. So, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. I mean, as is much anti-racism work, there's not like a right way, right? It's a journey, it's a path. This makes sense for this reason, but it's problematic. It's incomplete. So for those well-intentioned white leaders who are trying to get it right, is there a right when it comes to language? What is the best? Like, how do you move forward? What is the best way to move forward if you're trying to be thoughtful around naming?
I think that there are things that you don't say.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a right and wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I need to be explicit about the things that you don't say.
No.
At this point, we know what you don't say. I think the main thing is to be inclusive with your language. Make sure that you are being very intentional with who you're talking about. A lot of times I feel like when we're bunching people of color together with Black people, we're running away from Blackness. Do you know what I mean?
I
and
do.
we're dumbing that down. oh no, this is not just a Black issue, this is a people of color issue. And that's actually not factual. We do not all go through the same things. We have not all experienced the same things. And also, it is taking away from the fact that Black people were brought over here into America in a very different way than other cultures were. And so I think that we have to be very specific about who we're talking about. So when we're using words like BIPOC, that is an inclusive term. But are we...
You don't want to erase.
We
can't erase the distinct realities of each identity group. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I was going to ask another question and I lost it.
That's okay. It's my turn to ask you a question anyways.
Because I could do that. I could just ask you.
I know you could. But we're going to, your turn. I'm always curious.
Turn.
Your turn. My turn for you.
Yeah.
I'm always curious with you. No, seriously.
Oh, good. Let's do this.
As a white woman who's in the work, right? Who is an ally. I mean, you're very clear about who you are, what you stand for, what you represent, and what you stand by. I mean, that's just, and I respect it.
Thank you.
I often wonder, though, as a white woman who's in a leadership position who has power, how you are balancing power and giving power to others. And does that conflict with the work that you're trying to do around anti-racism, which means creating space for other Black Indigenous leaders?
Yep. That's a great question. That's a question I ask myself all the time and need to ask myself all the time in order to really be honest. Like, am I taking a space that someone else could be occupying or should be occupying, right? And I think I was asked that question when I interviewed for this job.
Really?
Yeah, I think I was. Or maybe I asked it of myself. I can't, because I can't not ask that question. And the answer I had at the time was, I have something to offer right now. Like, nothing's eternal, right? I won't be here forever. And I think I have something to offer to move the collective work forward at this moment in time in a way that makes me say, I'm ready to step in. Like, I'll step into this and give what I can give, and then I will step aside. And that's, and while I'm stepping into it, I'm going to be intentional about setting conditions and bringing people along and not making space for, but just, raising awareness around the ways that we can change how arts organizations, especially organizations that have been predominantly white-led and white-populated in terms of their staffing in the past, how to shift that into a space that is more, that's ready for the brilliance that's going to come, right? The readiness is the piece that I want to focus on. And so it's a journey. It's not a straight line. It's a backwards and a forwards, and I'm always asking, how can I show up in a way that's helpful and that's not centering myself? That's the hard part in a leadership position.
But what does that look like?
Ooh. Well, it looks like not having the vision of what the festival looks like be Shelley's vision, right? It looks like making sure that when we're talking, when we're building relationships with funders and with community leaders, that I'm not the only person in the room. That I'm acknowledging the things that I can and can't bring to the table,
right?
Because of my lived experiences. So I'm naming the gaps. I'm not trying to be everything, because I can't. That's real. And so naming the things that I can and can't bring to the table, and what the organization is going to need next. And that we don't have that. I think that's what it looks like.
Well, what do you recommend for other organizations that are similar to you with, white leadership? And let's be honest, most arts organizations or organizations in general are led by white leadership. So what advice would you give to people about redistributing power within their leadership that already exists or within their staffing? What does that look like in practicality?
Yeah. Well, the executive director position, even though it's the executive director position, is not the only position with power in an organization. Certainly isn't. And, I think the importance is figuring out where are those key decision-making roles and ensuring that the folks that are in those key decision-making roles represent the fullness of the community. And we do it imperfectly, but we got to keep moving that forward because it's not just about execution of work, it's about choices and having the capacity to have choices, make choices, get resources behind those choices, and then be supported in making choices that someone might question.
Right.
And not having that be a game, well, you're done. you screwed up. So, like that. So that's the role I feel like I can play, is a supportive role about, we're going to invest in you. We are going to support you, be behind you, and help to communicate to all of our stakeholders why what you're doing is valuable. I think that's, the decision-making piece is really, really critical, is handing over that decision-making.
Are you ever uncomfortable? And
No.
I'm sure you are uncomfortable. I mean, but are you ever uncomfortable in the sense you have I'm sure black or brown people that are on your team, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so you're trying to lead, why we need to do this anti-racism work, yet you're talking to the people who have lived experience in a leadership capacity. When you're saying, we're doing this training, we're taking this pledge, this is important. Like, is that awkward? And is it uncomfortable? Do you feel like, who am I to be the one to tell these people who have a lived experience about racism and about why we need to advance racial justice and racial equity? I'm just curious about what that feels like.
That's a really good. See, you didn't stop. You just kept going with the questions.
I'm sorry.
No,
I
you're
told
fine.
you. Well, when I said, hey, do you want to do? I really just have genuine questions for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. That's a great question. I mean, okay, so I'm going to answer it in coming from a lot of different ways. I think one of my most important jobs is to build trust with my team, and to acknowledge the fact that everyone's coming into this work with a different lived experience. And my experience is that Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, Native people are coming in with lived experience of having trust broken. And so it's my job to build that trust, to show up in a way that encourages people to feel not safe, because I think that
I hate that word.
I know,
yeah.
you got to be. There's a courageousness that you have to step into. You're not going to feel safe all the time, but at least comfortable enough to say, if I say something, Shelly's going to hear me. Like, that's what I want to. That's the kind of environment I want to create, and do something about it. So I don't approach anti-racism work, training, pledges like we're doing this. This is happening. I'm in charge. It's a conversation, and I always speak from like, here's my experience. Here's what I've seen. Here's why I think this is important based on my noticings. Is any of this resonating with you? What are your experiences? What do you all think, right? And then we can have a dialogue. It's hard to create a condition in a predominantly white organization for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to feel, at least I think it is, to feel comfortable speaking truth in that space. It is hard. And so when someone steps into their courage, uses their courage to step in with bravery to speak, I really try to honor it, and take a moment and acknowledge it, and ensure that especially the white folks in the room are listening, that it's landing, and that it's centering. And I have some great colleagues at the festival that are white that do the same thing. Right? I'm not doing it alone. We're doing it in community, and I think that that makes a difference. That makes a difference. So,
okay.
Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay. And then if someone tells me I'm wrong, I listen. I mean, that,
And so that's so key, though.
That's the other thing.
That's so key, right? I realize that, and this is just in my experience, just in general, in life, in being in this capacity for a long time, that I realize that people ask you a question and you tell them the real truth, but they're not ready to accept truth.
Yeah.
People, especially in this type of work, people only seem to want to hear what's going to be safe or makes them feel comfortable or go half the way. But this is not some type of half commitment.
No.
This is a full commitment and an undoing and an understanding of what we're talking about, right? And an understanding of the history of racism, why we have inequities, right? Of redlining, of the wealth gap, of the education gap. If you're not willing to understand that, right, and put your own privilege to the side, then we're never going to get anywhere. It's problematic. So I just think truth-telling, listening is very, very important.
Absolutely.
And not taking up space.
Yeah. And the work is simultaneously, it's about me. As a white person, it's about me, and it's not about me. It's not only about me, right? Like, it's about me and my life, and I have to let go of power and be intentional and be about this work. And also, no one's saying you screwed up. Like, that's not, if that's your takeaway, then, I mean, maybe that's true, but that, that's not the way to receive it. It's like, get into this work. There's work to do.
Right.
Come on. Like,
Yeah.
it's not about being good or perfect. It's about being engaged.
I think too, because I'm sitting here thinking about what you just said about me. As a white person, it's about you, but it's not about you. That's interesting. It's nuanced, but it's actually true, right? Because of the fact that, I always go back to like, okay, whose problem is racism? It's an everybody problem, but who created it? It wasn't black people.
That's right.
So it shouldn't be black and brown people that are forced to be the ones to have to figure out the solution.
That's right.
To what they didn't create.
Yep.
So in that case, it is a white people problem.
That's right. Absolutely. And when I say about you and not about you, I mean, it's about Shelley, and it's also about white people, right? Which is how I share the responsibility outside of myself.
Yeah.
So I have some questions for you.
Okay. I did just dominate. Ask you question after question.
It's totally fine. So in your role and with the anti-racism pledge, I'm guessing that a lot of people are asking you for advice and like, what do I do with this? And is this right? Or am I doing this the right way? And looking maybe for validation, maybe for coaching. What's the hardest kind of feedback to give well-intentioned white leaders? And, I'm not taking myself out of that category. That's who we are, in moments of this work. So what's hard about that dynamic?
I think right now, especially in the pandemic, so many of our arts organizations are struggling. There's not resources, or there's a lack of resources. It's a different time. And so I understand those components, and it's hard for me to look them in the face and say, well, we really still need to prioritize racial equity. And so, like, even though you're going through those things in the pandemic, that feels like an excuse. That's hard for me because I understand just the human lived experience of everything we all have experienced in 2020 and continue to experience in 2021.
Yeah.
So that's hard. Also, I think sometimes telling the truth is hard when you know people are trying and they're looking you in their face and they're sharing all of these things about their programming and their policy that they're changing, and they're so excited about it, and you have to tell them that's not enough, or actually, no, that's not right? Yeah. Or your language is not right that you're using right now. So having to constantly check people along the way when they genuinely think they're doing the right thing is hard. So I just think the entire thing can be hard sometimes. Trying to meet people where they are, and yet you're more advanced than them, or you're more progressive minded than them, I think is a difficult thing for a lot of our leaders. And I think there are arts leaders who are further along than their board, and I think that is a challenge. So for me, having to say, well, none of that matters.
Yeah.
You have to figure it out. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can you're in a very critical position in the city, because you're a resource for arts organizations who are in different spaces in this work, and who will have different journeys. It's not the same journey for everyone, especially based on art form and how they were formed and the support structure and all of that. And you're also advancing work for artists and putting forth a vision for this city that is complementary to but separate from that. How can arts leaders help you? How can white arts leaders help you and support you? What do you need to be successful?
Jeez. I don't often think about that, but that's just a flaw that I have in general. I'm so giving. I never think about what it is that I need. What do I need? I think. So I feel like I've been getting some of what I need, to be honest, in a sense. What I will say is I do feel that I've been able to create space, and I feel like I've been able to create things that you will not normally see in a person in my position, in my role, in a municipality. Operating in government in general, even when I was at the state, you're operating in a system that is literally designed to have red tape everywhere, and you can't it's hard to maneuver through that system, right? And so I've been fortunate, though, to be able to get into this role, be very clear about we're doing cultural equity. We're tackling anti-racism and advancing, becoming anti-racist, but also advancing racial equity. That's what we're going to do. And I realized the more I talk to my colleagues from other municipalities across the nation that it hasn't been as easy for them. So I already feel like I came into a space where I didn't have to fight for what I knew was right. And I was very clear from the beginning what I was going to do when I got here. And I think that already set the expectation. And I do feel supported by a lot. Not everybody.
Yeah.
Not everybody. I've definitely got some hate mail, to be honest.
Okay, yeah,
right?
that's real. That's real.
But I've been supported, and I think I've made it very clear. So I think that's, I don't know. That's, to be honest, because I just feel like I'm already supported. I think I would say what would be helpful would be for people to, well, it goes back to that power thing, right? And privilege. To understand when they're operating from a place of privilege. Because a lot of times I do have leaders come to me and they feel entitled to something. They feel entitled to funding. They feel entitled to sponsorship. They feel entitled to all of these other things that have nothing to do with what we said we're doing right now in our department that's tied to cultural equity and advancing those who do not have opportunities. So I feel like if you want to help me, work on that, because it's not helpful.
So what keeps you, in this work, in this place that you're in right now, knowing it's a journey, this isn't the last stop, what keeps you up at night? What worries you? What's like, oh man, if we don't get this thing right, then that's problematic?
I, especially this past 3 weeks, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, I don't know, because the last 3 weeks have been crazy busy. Impact. Measuring impact. Are we really having impact? Is what we're doing really changing anything? I feel like I talk a lot to a lot of people, whether it's through the job, being on panel, doing a keynote. I'm talking about these things, I'm ministering these things, I'm preaching these things. And I worry that the impact may not be there. Not my individual impact, but I've been in conversations with a lot of other BIPOC leaders lately who are just saying, we're so tired of talking. The conversations are old. What does action look like? And also, if you're gonna ask me to continue, and this is not really for me because I get paid to do what I do, but you're asking for free advice, and it's exhausting. People are asking for free advice from people in the BIPOC community and not paying for it, and it's emotionally taxing. And you can't always see the resolution. You can't always see the action. It's almost like people just want to continue to have conversation, and that's what makes them feel good. And so what keeps me up at night is that. What is the impact really? What are we doing here really? Has anything changed? And if it is, how are we measuring change? I also feel like sometimes I'm being pulled in a lot of different directions where, different agendas, different meetings, so much going on that you can't be as intentional as you really want to be and really advance something. And that worries me, that concerns me. But yeah, I would say in general, just it all comes down to impact.
Yeah, that resonates. One of the lessons I learned from outside of myself, someone gave this lesson to me early on in the work, was that, it's not just about who's on stage, what art you're putting up. It's about who's getting a regular paycheck, who has decision-making power, who's at the table. What's the economic investment? What's the economic equity piece? Because that's real. That, a lot of what we're talking about is money.
That's true.
Right? It's money.
That's true.
And, excuse me. That's why I say decision-making positions tend to get paid more. And positions that are focused on executing work don't get paid as much. And so there's an economic element in the equity that we're talking about that I don't think can be ignored. That's tied to about whose vision is it, and all of those things. So that's real, and sometimes that's where it hurts and pushes when you're talking about privilege the most. Well, wait, I might not be qualified for this. If you need someone that is connected to the diverse communities of New Haven, is that maybe I'm not qualified for this job as a white person from the suburbs. Wait a second. Like that's where that push I think can come from sometimes. And
I can get your phone.
oh, I got it. Thank you. You know, I remember having this conversation when I was focused on education work quite a bit about with teaching artists. We at my former job, we employed a lot of teaching artists of color to do work with young people in the schools, in part because so many of their educators were white,
Right.
and didn't have the cultural responsive curriculum that these young people needed to be successful. So there was pushback sometimes from educators, and what we realized when we were in dialogue was that it was about relevance. It was about fear of irrelevance. And there is I think there's a fear inside of white people, not every white person, but in whiteness about, as this world is changing, as this, the makeup of society changes and power rises within Black and brown communities, where's my place? Am I relevant? Right?
That is, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think that there is a lot of fear that if we start to balance out power from white people,
Yep.
that if we start to balance out power, where is my place? Where do I go?
That's
What's
right.
for me? I do think, and I do think that's valid, right? As far as like the fear, but the idea is that we're not trying to take anything from you. We don't want to take from you. We're just saying we deserve that too.
That's right. That's right.
What equity looks like.
That's right.
But we have to acknowledge first that there are so many people who have not been granted the opportunities that white people have, even white people who are poor, and we have, would still be considered more privileged than Black people.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right, Black and brown people. And so I think we're just saying that this is a matter of we're not saying we don't want you to exist in the space at all.
That's right. That's right. Like, you're welcome here.
Right.
You just don't get all the things.
All of the things, right? But because it's been so unequitable for so long, now we have to create intentional opportunity until we get to the point where things really are equal. Until then, you do have to give up space. You do have to sacrifice. If that's what you're saying, not you, but just in general. If that's what you're saying, you really are going to stand by, you're really about, there will be sacrifice in that. There is nothing that moves forward in this world, in movements, in real change, that doesn't take sacrifice.
That's right. And there is a freedom too, I think. And that's the part that I try to focus on. Like, I don't need to control the outcome, right? I just need to walk in the work and trust that I'm going to be okay. And there is joy and liberation and freedom in that kind of letting go. And that's what I would hope for us as white leaders is that we embrace that part of the work, the joy and the liberation and the freedom in letting go, and knowing that it's not about knowing where the end is. It's about following the path.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. That's the perfect place to end. Thank you for talking to me, and for being a friend, and for being an ally and a colleague in this work. It really has been just a pleasure continuing to get to know you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Shelley.